Yeah, it's dark.
The moon landing happened, Jake.
Real dad shit, dog.
Don't fuck with me or I'ma fuck with you.
For all the emo sad girl, I want to touch bellies with this man.
All right, well, welcome to another episode of SceneLabs, everyone. This is episode 23, Jake, by the way. I don't know if you were aware of the number once again, but 23.
23.
We're still babies, but we're getting into the double digits.
Yep.
We have a very special episode today. Joining us is Trenton Woodley, ex-vocalist of Hands Like Houses. Trenton, what's going on, man?
Doing well. I was just thinking that 23, it's that number that, had a movie made about it, but it's also my birthday. So it's appropriate.
Well, there you go.
In a couple of weeks?
Yes, sir.
Depending on when this goes up.
Well, happy birthday in
Thank
advance.
23.
And
well
it was
done.
your birthday last week.
Yeah, it was my birthday last week.
So happy birthday to Trenton and
Happy
Jake.
birthday.
Thank you.
Trenton, you, like I said, you were in a band called Hands Like Houses from, and correct me if I'm wrong, because all this information I have is from the Wikipedia. So we all know how that goes.
Not,
but
yeah.
2008 to 2023. Does that sound about right?
Technically, yes. I joined the band on when I moved down. So I'd moved interstate, just to be closer to family, and then the band kind of asked me to come back. And so I formally moved to Canberra between Christmas and New Year's. I think our first band practice was on the last day of 2008. So yes, 2008 to 2021, but only 1 day's worth of 28 and only a month's worth of 21, I guess. No, not 21, 23. Yeah.
Because I was thinking the last song that came out with you a part of it was in 2023, correct?
It's 20. Oh crap. No, it's 2022. It was December 22.
2022
that came out.
Okay.
Yep.
So I wanted to go over some of the catalog that included you with Hands Like Houses. Ground Dweller in 2012, Unimagine 2013, Dissonance in 2016, Anon in 2018, and a self-titled EP in 2020.
Yep. And
just make sure I'm not missing anything.
Reimagine in 2014, which is an acoustic remake of Unimagine.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah. That's all right.
My bad.
And I mean, singles scattered throughout, and there was, the first single of a 3-track EP that never eventuated, but the first song came out, that was Drift.
Okay, gotcha.
So yeah, there are a lot of moving parts in there, but yeah, 4.5 albums. It's definitely a long time, a lot of opportunities that most don't get, and definitely enjoy the ride. So, try not to let the back. Oh, sorry.
I wrote down some notable tours that you were a part of with Hands Like Houses, and I know there were so many, but I just basically went and looked and took the most interesting ones to me.
Sure.
Collide with the Sky tour in 2012. That is a huge tour to be on, especially at the beginning of a run with the band.
It definitely opened some doors that would have not have opened to it otherwise, and definitely created some momentum. So, very, very special tour, that one.
And I didn't do these in order, but the Disease tour with the Beartooth headlining. It's funny because you did a tour with Disease with Beartooth headlining, and then you also did the Unconditional tour with Memphis Mayfire when Beartooth was the opening band.
In reverse order to that, I think. Yeah. I think it was, so, I mean, that was cool. I mean, we've known Caleb, Caleb was actually, singing for Attack on our second ever US tour with Scream It Like You Mean It in 2012, I believe it was. US tour, I should say, second ever US tour. But we kind of met through Caleb. They were on the other, I don't know if you remember Scream It Like You Mean It, but it was but that year in particular, there was 2 halves to the tour that were kind of crisscrossing across the country. So what they call A markets, which was your bigger cities or bigger kind of music scenes, both sides of the package would meet up and you'd have a mega show. And then in between you would have basically the tour just kind of crisscrossed over itself, which was cool. It was a cool idea. But Caleb was on the other side, but I remember meeting him at, it was a massive thunderstorm, actually. It was a really stormy day. I think the festival got called off partway through, but it was somewhere in Philly, or Pennsylvania at least. like AE Theatre or something like that. But yeah, I remember just like, I think the festival cancelled, all the bands were inside just hanging. That's when I first met Caleb, and just to kind of see him grow from, you know, obviously Attack, then starting Beartooth, and then just the insane heights that they've gone to now. Like, it's very cool to see that from the outside in.
Yeah. And the last few that I wrote down were just Pierce the Veil UK tour with Woe Is Me and Pierce the Veil, and then Warped Tour 2013 and 2017. And this is an insane list. What's that? In 15?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I missed that one. My bad. That's all right. This is a great lineup. Like, and there's like probably 20 more tours that I don't even have written down here. But the fact that you were able to tour with some of these bands, I mean, how does that feel looking back on that run with Hands Like Houses and getting to tour with some of the most important bands in the scene today?
Yeah, it's funny, man, because like I know what a big deal that is in my head, but I think so much of it happened in such a short amount of time as well. A lot of it's kind of a bit of a blur that I've just got to really think about, like, which memory is which. But like, I mean, you know, I have lasting friendships from some of those, like even, you know, just having, you know, a month or two ago, I went to go see Beartooth and Pierce to play together at a place called Horden Pavilion in Sydney a couple months ago. And that was phenomenal to see them, you know, all together and kind of just hang and kind of celebrate the massive heights they've both gone to. So just, you know, there's friendships there, and just, yeah, I mean, we had so many great opportunities, and I mean, there's kind of a sense of like, I guess, you know, the tragedy that it kind of never quite, you know, the wave never quite broke for us. Like, I think we always had like a lot of momentum, but never quite just crossed that threshold of critical mass to the point where we were playing those venues and headlining those tours. Sure. And it all, you know, there's all sorts of reasons for that, with like, you know, just the fact that we're a band from outside of the States, and the touring world over there is very like insular. It's like, a lot of places don't really know how to handle international bands. It's not set up for international bands because we have these high overheads from the outset. So, but yeah, like, you know, it's phenomenal to kind of like look at my laminate bundle that I have under my you know, my like memorabilia box and just like, oh man, just to see what memories it brings up. And that's always cool to think back. But yeah, it's, I don't know. I don't feel like it doesn't feel real thinking back on it in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I'm now envisioning the lanyards that y'all had for those tours, and I'm just like, man, I would hold on to that forever. I would get a frame and just like look at them and be like, oh yeah, that was real, and this is physical proof of it.
Yeah, well, it's actually, I went through that in 2020 because, you know, had time on my hands, as we all did, and tallied up the shows, and yeah, like I didn't actually realize we played like almost 1,100 shows in 27 countries over the years. So
wow,
yeah.
That's crazy.
Hence the blur.
And there was,
yeah,
I couldn't tell you exactly which years it was, but when I was looking at these tours, it did look like there were a few specific years where y'all toured like the whole year, like very little stops. I want to say 2014 seemed like one of those years that was really, really, really tour heavy for you guys, but I can't imagine being away like from home that long, or even being out of the country that like for that long. That's crazy to me.
Not even being mostly in your home country for most of the year. It's wild.
Yeah, well, 2015, I think we were home for a grand total of, I think it was 4 weeks of 2015 we were home. The touring was either side of that, like scattered through 2015, but we were also recording Dissonance, which we did in kind of 2 halves. And, you know, I think because of the relentless touring, we hadn't really had time to kind of, you know, spend the time refining ideas that we'd kind of had with previous records. And, you know, not to say that we didn't have a refined product in the end, but like we hadn't had the time to really kind of slow down and make that record. And I think that, you know, that ended up kind of blowing out the album timeline. So we ended up needing to spend like another 4 weeks, I think 3 or 4 weeks later in 2015. So that, with Warped Tour in the middle plus international engagements either side, like I was home for like 4 weeks out of 52. And then, yeah, I think 2014 and 16 were both pretty tour heavy as well, with everything kind of built around that. So yeah, it was brutal, and it, you know, definitely nearly broke my relationship, just with just not being here. But
sure.
Yeah, you know what sometimes the things that survive thrive, and got my wife and family to show for it for now, and kind of the life I've been able to build after the fact.
Yeah. Just to finalize the tour conversation real quick, do you have like a specific favorite tour memory or two that you'd like to share?
Oh, I mean, that's a very broad selection. I mean, favorite tour, I think Collide with the Sky would have to be one of the standouts in my mind, because obviously, Pierce have gone on to bigger things, like, you know, this Pierce tour is, so this Blink-182 tour is ridiculous, what they're doing right now, even though they're not headlining, like, who cares?
And they're even doing arenas without Blink-182.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you know, they've gone to that, like, cool, we can quit music, we're done, we've completed the game, achievement unlocked, 100%.
Let's all go home.
But no, that Collide with the Sky tour, it was just such a cool group of people. Like, I mean, we bonded with Tonight Alive, especially because obviously both Australian bands, both kind of at a similar point in our career at the time. You know, they had big wins in the UK, and we were still just starting out, but in the US we were kind of on like level sort of footing. And just given that we were the two openers, like, we had a lot of time kind of, you know, but we were still vanning around, I think, back then. So we'd kind of hang out together and then, but yeah, to get to know like the Sligma Sirens and Pierce folks as well was phenomenal. So like, I don't know, just like, I mean, I know we've kind of taken a little segue again, but like, one of my favorite memories from that tour was like day 2. We're at the Nile Theater in Phoenix, Arizona. And we had like, basically the call went around all the tour managers, like, all right, non-negotiable, 4 p.m, front of stage, every single person on the package, no exceptions. Having come from a couple of tours and kind of a different day and age where there was a lot of pay your dues. I mean, there is still this idea of paying your dues in inverted commas. But back then there was a lot of weird like politics, like headliner politics. And I think as a band getting out there and opening shows and just the stuff where you'd get, you know, 6 drum kits stacked in front of each other to the point where, you know, literally the drums are falling off the stage. And as a singer, you're stuck one side of the drums because you can't move. Like, coming from that, where we're all just like, this is second day of tour, mind you, not first day, this is second day of tour, and we're all just like, oh shit, what have we done? Like, what's happened? Who's stuffed something up? Has someone done the wrong thing? Like, you know, broken a tour rule, you know, shit on the bus type situation. And the tour manager like puts on it, like Pierce's tour manager's like, all right, is everyone here? All right, cool. I'm going to hand over to Vic, and Vic's like brings out, you know, basically a bottle of Jameson, a stack of pizza, and it's like, hey, look, we like you guys as bands, we love you guys as people. We want this to be a really fun tour, free of all the bullshit we've all been through already. So here's some Jameson and pizza. Let's have a great time. And it was just,
that's fucking legendary.
Yeah, like that was just such a cool like inspiration for like, this is what headlining can be like. It's not about just kind of pay your dues and then get to the top and then treat everyone below you like shit, which is not necessarily what had happened, but we had certainly seen that in other shows and tours we'd been on, like seen or like the symptoms of that in the way other bands conducted themselves. And it, you know, it was kind of a toxic sort of thing. So it was just really nice and kind of really shaped the way that we tried to do things for a long time.
And I feel like a lot of times these stories come out and they're never band specific, because you never want to call a band out, especially as a smaller band. You never want to be like, oh, well, X, Y, and Z band sucks as a headliner. But you hear these stories and it's like some of the bands, like the opener band will be like, yeah, we never even saw them. Like, we never talked to them. We never shared the same space with them. So the fact that Vic came out and was like, yeah, here's some Jameson and pizza, like that's fucking epic. Yeah. Like, you can't do better than that.
Look, they're really wonderful people. And I think, you know, they're getting to do that tour and then the UK tour not long after. I mean, I was actually just messaging with Tony this morning, just asking how the shows were going. And he was chasing up like a bit of fan art that I wanted to share with a mate that Vic had posted up on his story. But yeah, like, you know, we still stay loosely in touch. Like, you know, I'm not pretending I'm their best mate or anything, but or at least at message status, which is cool.
Hell yeah. And then I guess the last thing I'll say about the tours is Warped Tour. How was Warped Tour? And like, you played 3 different years. So how was that experience like? And was it weird to experience it? Because like, I think of Warped Tour from our point of view, and we're like, we kind of grew up and heard about Warped Tour all the time. We're in the same country as Warped Tour. We know friends that went to Warped Tour. But you guys being from Australia, was it a weird like thing to experience for the first time?
I mean, yes. Just it was such an interesting cultural kind of institution, phenomenon, whatever word you want to use. But like, it was a time that doesn't exist, and I think that people have trouble understanding in the same way now, just because like social media and the internet have just changed. Like at that stage, I think there was probably a lot more, like it was the interactions you had in that environment were more powerful than like a social media DM or comment or like or share. You know what I mean? For like sure. It was just, there was that whole thing. And I mean, like Warped Tour was always kind of iconic. But coming from Australia, like we had Warped Tour back in like the late 90s, early thousands when it was like, you know, your Blink-182s and your Limp Bizkits and stuff like that kind of playing, The Offspring, that sort of stuff. Like, and it had that heyday, but that wasn't really our generation either. So I think for us, it was kind of more the scene bands that we all looked up to that were playing Warped Tour in like, you know, kind of those peak years of like 2007 through 2011 sort of like as a, you know, aspiring emo band, like it was kind of that was the draw for us. And so I think the first time it was kind of this big adventure of like, I can't believe we're doing this. And then after that, I think we're kind of conditioned, like it's a grueling tour. There's a reason they would send out people like, you know, Katy Perry or BB Rexa to kind of, you know, cut their teeth touring, on Warped Tour, alongside all the punk bands because it's heavy. It's day in, day out. You never know what time you're going to play, whether that's going to be 11:30 as they're opening the gates or at 8:00 at night. You know, you plan your days accordingly. So yeah, I mean, there's always barbecues and parties in the parking lot. Yes. There's always, you know, things to do, bands to see. You know, your day changes rapidly.
Drama to hear about.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, there was always that aspect. We tried to stay clear of a lot of it, but
for sure,
you know, it was a thing. It's really hard to reflect on it broadly, and it was kind of interesting, kind of seeing, I guess, not so much the decline. Well, I guess it was the decline of Warped Tour, but kind of the social changes and the cultural expectations that were changing, and the way that, you know, that kind of put the writing on the wall for this wonderful thing can't last forever. And so seeing that from 13, feeling like this is incredible, like to 15, feeling like something feels off, to 17, knowing that it was going to be one of the last, like, yeah, that was kind of an odd contrast, but I don't know, it kind of gave me an appreciation for what it was in those. I mean, even in 17 and 15, like we had some incredible experiences, don't get me wrong, and met some phenomenal bands and cool people. But yeah, I think I'm glad we got to experience it kind of early on rather than kind of aiming towards it and then kind of getting on just as it's wrapping up, you know?
Well, it's a really interesting thing you bring up with you could kind of feel the decline, like the whole "this can't last forever" thing. So I went to the last Warped Tour, 2018. I was lucky enough to be able to go. And I know like a lot of people are like, oh, Warped Tour was easy to go to. They never really sold out. But I felt lucky to be able to attend the final year. And oddly enough, from a audience standpoint, I feel like 2018 felt like the biggest one yet. Also, there's a train that's going by our building right now, so we might need to pause for just a second. But yeah, just going back to that, I just feel like 2018 had like that, oh shit, this is going to go away. Like, and it felt bigger because of that. I went in 2016 and 2018, so I was so unlucky to not see you guys because kind of going into the next point of this conversation, Unimagine specifically, but you guys in general, that was like one of my favorite artists in high school. And it got me through high school a lot. And I was so unlucky to just go the years that y'all weren't there. Every time they'd announce the lineup, I'd be like, all right, Sleeping with Sirens, Pierce the Veil, whoever, where's Hands Like Houses? Oh, well, not this year. Yeah. But then I hear that you went 3 years and I'm just like, oh, that's just luck.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I got to see you in 15 because I went 14 and 15.
Okay.
Back to back. That was the only times I got to go. But yeah, back then for me it was also a blur.
I remember,
that was like the beginning
what was the year that
college.
Linkin Park snuck onto it for like a date or two?
Oh.
Was that 2016?
I feel like it was 2000. I think it was 2016.
Yeah. As someone who like grew up like absolutely frothing on Linkin Park, like watching that happen and thinking, God damn, I played it last year. I know I'm playing it next year. Seeing, you know, friends and peers kind of get to do a song with Linkin Park and I'm just on the other side of the planet thinking, why am I not there this year? Yep. Like that hurt my feelings, but still, it was cool.
Well, in the Linkin Park thing, I remember too, because I went in 16 and I remember that Linkin Park was either playing like the date after mine or 2 days before it, it was close, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, you got to be fucking kidding me, man. I could have seen Linkin Park.
Yeah.
Well, that's just how it goes, man.
Yep.
All right. I want to jump into just, I'm not even trying to like kiss your ass here, but man, when I saw these chart positions, I got to tell you, I was pretty happy because I had no idea, right? So I look at Unimagined and Dissonance specifically, and I see here that y'all debuted at 4 for Unimagined and 3 for Dissonance in the US hard rock charts, and number 7 in the Australia charts for Dissonance. That's insane. Like, and I think back and I'm like, for some reason, things didn't feel that big to me back then. And again, I was in high school, so my whole thought process was fucked constantly. But that's crazy. Like, do you guys remember, do you specifically remember getting those numbers back and finding out how successful those albums were at the time?
I don't know. Maybe I'm just old and jaded, but it never, like, one thing I've learned from my corporate gig post music is that data can say whatever you want it to. And so metrics and things like that, like, I guess there's always the sense that, like, I mean, it felt like a big deal because that's something that kind of made us look like a big deal to people that didn't really understand the numbers. And even then, it still was a big deal. Like, you know, that's not something, you know, like, it's not to be sneezed at. Don't get me wrong. But, like, I think what I learned is that until you know what the reference the reference point is, that it's just numbers. It's just like a marketing dot point. And like the number 7 in Australia for like just album releases in general, that would probably felt like a bigger deal than like, you know, hard rock charts and stuff, especially at a time like, you know, hard rock is something that the music industry never really knew what it was for a long time. Like, you know, you look at like Grammy nominations for like, actually in Australia we have the ARIA Awards, which is kind of our Grammys. But like they have like a hard rock and metal thing that covers such a broad scope of music, and it always ends up being the same sort of bands. But anyway, that's
That's how it is here though, for sure. The Grammys, it's like, oh, Metallica's won. No offense at Metallica, I know they're legendary, but like, it's like Metallica or Foo Fighters have won every year for the last decade, and it's like, okay, we get it. They're wonderful bands, right? They've made huge impacts, but like, let's give some other bands some attention here.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's easy. I think we all go, especially with like the internet kind of making us all causing us to live in our own echo chambers. And I think we all feel like, you know, our taste, you know, we're all in niches. Everyone's in little like niches. And that's why we don't have the mega bands that of, you know, even 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago, because, you know, the most accessible bands were the ones that were pushed out en masse. And everyone had the same channels of consuming music. But as like, you know, internet's kind of diversified our communities that we build around, you know, smaller and smaller subgenres, I think it's harder for us to reflect on that. So yeah, like, you know, creating like a hard rock chart as opposed to a Billboard 200, like a Billboard 200 like felt like a big deal. And I don't think we got there. Yeah, I think just like, because the internet's kind of caused us to kind of, there's this like diversification of music interest, you know what I mean? Like we're all in our like niche subgenres, and those have become, you know, increasingly deeper niches to the point where they're no longer niches. They're now like subgenres or even genres onto themselves. And like, I think because everyone has access to everything all the time, rather than having these kind of, you know, distribution channels deciding at least what we're exposed to, if not what we listen to actively. What that means is we're not going to have the sort of mega bands that would have existed, you know, that are still dominating those sort of charts, like, you know, your Foo Fighters, your, you know, Metallica's. Like, I don't think those headline bands will come around again. Like the closest thing we have is bands like, you know, Day to Remember. So not Day to Remember, Bring Me the Horizon, Day to Remember, like, I suppose there are other ones outside of the bubble, but at least from our world, like that feels like that's the closest thing that's we're going to see reach that, anything like that level.
For sure.
But yeah.
Bring Me the Horizon being the biggest example of that even now. I mean, like I know A Day to Remember, you know, was that big band back then when I was like in high school and stuff, but now that's Bring Me the Horizon. And, 10 years, 12 years from now, that's probably going to be someone different. I mean, that's just seems to be how it goes.
Yeah, it's just how quickly stuff changes nowadays. You don't really have a sitting champion.
Yep. Attention spans are very short nowadays.
And I think we have, impossible expectations of the artists that we kind of consume and listen to. When it comes to growth, like stay the same, but not exactly the same, because then it's going to become derivative and lesser, but don't push the envelope too. It's kind of this impossible like tightrope of, catering to what people love about you while still pushing boundaries so that you evolve and they evolve with you. Like it's just an impossible task, I think. And, something that certainly kind of bit us in the ass over time, but, I also don't think we did went about the right way about it either. But yeah, so anyway, to answer the original question about like, charting positions, like it was kind of like a validation moment with like family and friends and people that aren't in our music world. So it was definitely cool in that regard. And I mean, I've got the plaque at the back of my studio with like that we got from Rise for Unimagine. They didn't give us one for Dissonance, even though Dissonance did better, but because they knew we weren't going to re-sign with them, so they didn't want to send us another one. I don't think they saw that as a worthwhile investment.
That's lame.
Maybe we should have dangled the carrot a bit longer, so we've got plaques at least. But no,
there you go.
That's
All right. Well, Trenton, I want to move on to some not as fun topic, but I think it's important to discuss. And I kind of want to just give you the floor here instead of me asking you a bunch of questions. And I might, have a couple questions for you while you're telling this story. But I think it's safe to say that you not being in Hands Like Houses was not something that was it wasn't expected. It caught a lot of people off guard. At least people that were not like involved in your actual picture, what was going on behind the scenes. So I just wanted to give you a chance to tell us and our listeners your side of the story and just go into what happened, what transpired, and where you're at now. And yeah, so the floor is yours.
Oof. Open floor. Maybe a question would have been easier. So basically beginning of last year, like January last year, we just come off the back of releasing Hurricane. We'd done a few comeback shows after, post-COVID, I guess a period of down tools where we had to kind of deal with a couple of situations that's kind of not really worth going into right now, but we basically had to sue our former record label for defamation based on some allegations that were made in a public space that they moderated, and there was a much deeper rabbit hole that kind of went into that, and that's been kind of addressed and dealt with, and that kind of took us off creative. Like we had to approach that authentically and meaningfully. We had to kind of down tools and say, we can't do business as usual until this is dealt with. And that's kind of what we owe the bigger conversation. To do this the right way means not just continue touring, not just continue writing in the background together until we've got this figured out and we know what the future of the band looks like. So we'd gotten through all that. We'd put out Hurricane. We'd played 3 comeback shows, specifically booked as underplays, and sold them out like comprehensively because we didn't really know what we were coming back to after all, that a couple of years of relative break. And everything felt good. And we kind of had a meeting just to basically just said, hey, we got a Zoom call. It was like January 8th, I think. And we just kind of, had a Zoom call, and the guys just hit me with like, so how would you feel if someone else were to do your job for a bit? I'm like, well, what do you mean? And it kind of, that was kind of, so I kind of pressed a bit and I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? And we kind of talked through what they meant, and what kind of emerged was that they weren't really happy with my prolificity, just how quickly I would write, because at the time I had a 12-month-old kid, or 14-month-old kid, which any parent will tell you that's like a very high intensity time of the life where they're still not sleeping through the night. You're not getting consistent sleep. Like I'm managing a 9-to-5 job. I've got I'm stoked about music, but also I'm just got to be realistic that I got other priorities, and I just couldn't commit to timelines that they wanted to put together. And then I kind of pressed her like, well, is this about like touring? Do you guys want to get back on the road? Because if so, like, you know, do we want to have like, I guess like a formal kind of stand in for touring? If I, you know, if I can't do a tour, like I'd love to have first right of refusal, things like that. Like, I don't want to hold you guys back, but, you know, but then it kind of emerged like, you know, the more I kind of pressed, the more it became apparent that I don't know, it was just them kind of trying to soften the blow. Like, hey, we don't want you to be the singer for our band anymore. And like, you know, no one kind of said that to me outright. It just, you know what I mean? It was kind of reading between the lines the more I pressed and asked about like.
Did you kind of know that though, when they initially were like, hey, how would you be okay if someone else did your job for a bit? Did you realize that it was
completely
going that
blindsided
way?
by the whole conversation? Because I was like, at the time, as far as I was aware, we were working on like what, you know, I guess what we call the Eras project, which we would have changed the name of post Taylor Swift, but like, you know, we're working on like not Eras, sorry, Wavelengths. Eras was kind of a similar kind of project, like I wanted to do in parallel through COVID, but this idea of Wavelengths, where we would basically have, you know, because we had so many songs and demos that all sounded totally different. Like, we can't put these on a record; they're not going to make sense together. But we kind of were trying to, as far as I was aware, like this is an idea that a couple of other guys had come up with in principle, and I'd kind of dived in and looked at, like, lined it all up and spent a lot of, like, you know, back of house time kind of playing with what that could work. And we came up with this idea that, you know, it was a set of EPs that was kind of like the multiverse of HLH, like, you know, different creative decisions, different sort of feels. So something that felt like, you know, kind of in between like Unimagine and Dissonance sort of time period, something that's a bit more like folky and like acoustic focused, something that was real, like kind of more like, you know, industrial leaning, like some, like there's song examples for each, and kind of leaning into different kind of spheres of reference and spheres of sound. And that was the idea of Wavelengths, of just like, you know, different kind of alternate personalities with different, you know, different decisions that we'd made, not like alternate versions of ourselves, but just different kind of explorations of different facets of who we were and how we created. And that felt like a cool way to kind of like honor the past while still having an eye to the future. And that's kind of what was exciting for me. It was just like, you know, because I felt like we had abandoned aspects of kind of where we started and what we'd done. And like, I will never criticize or validate the sort of, you know, critique people had of it, other than like, sure, people are welcome to feel about any record that you know, the way that they feel. Like, I'm not going to say anyone has to feel a certain way.
You're welcome to listen, or you're welcome to not listen.
And like, you know, artistically, it's probably the album I'm most proud of, but I did feel like through like the reason that became what it was, you know, like I'm proud of the end product, less so aspects of the process that kind of led to what it was. So that's kind of like, anyway, that's what I thought we were working on. You know, this kind of like thing that enabled us to kind of acknowledge the fans that might have felt a bit abandoned or felt like they'd dropped off along the way for, you know, stylistic choices, a way of acknowledging that, hey, this is just like, this is not about the destination, it's about the journey. You know, cheesy as that is, but like,
so there was something in it for everyone. If you like Ground Dweller, you might like this. If you like Unimagine, you might like this. If you like the Nine, you might like this. And kind
of doing it in a set of like mini EPs that kind of, you know, fit together as EPs, but wouldn't have fit together as like an album. You know what I mean? And that was kind of a way of like kind of palette cleansing and kind of, you know, bringing people along for the ride if they were interested. You know what I mean? Like, and that was kind of like a cool, like reforge moment of like, hey, let's celebrate our legacy. You know, even to the point where like, you know, I had expressed at different times, like, I feel like we've kind of missed the bus. Like we talked earlier about like the idea of just not getting that critical momentum. I just feel like we've put all this time, we've built something really powerful, but let's just cruise on that. Let's ride on that. Let's celebrate our legacy, put out music, still write songs, but, you know, we celebrate what we've meant to people over the duration of our career without just trying to like, you know, constantly reach some ceiling that just felt like it moved every time we got closer. So there was that aspect, but like, anyway, all that in mind, like, that's where I thought we were at. I'd worked hard. I'd written a bunch of songs for like this concept, for this idea. And it just sounded like, oh, well, actually they just want to do something different now. And they're talking about leaning heavier. And I was like, well, that's cool. I'm keen to lean heavier, but let's do it as part of a big picture and not just kind of do it in a way that invalidates the last 5 years of our careers, you know? And
sure. Because then you're isolating some of your other songs and just like finding them in a void where you're not touching it.
Yeah.
I mean, that can leave a lot of fans feeling
absolutely,
disheartened.
absolutely. And I think that we even through the time since, like I've seen that, and that's cool. I mean, even the way that people have responded to what they've done now and what they're suggesting they want to do next, like that just, that's their thing, and that's fine. I do mean the part where I wish them well, but like, I'm happy to have nothing to do with it. So I know that that's a very roundabout way of saying kind of how it came about. Like, it was complex because nothing was said directly, but what was, I found out how it had been communicated to, mutual friends that, quite openly saying that, like, we've kicked out our singer. I'm like, well, that's not my understanding, but yeah, you know what I mean? Like, it kind of I just said, look, you guys have made it clear that you want to move forward without me. So let's find a way to make that make sense, not just for me. Like, I've got, there's always, like, I always dreamed of like what our final show would be like. Not that I was trying to sabotage the band to bring it about, but I'd seen bands that I loved and looked up to call it a day. And some of those concerts were really powerful. Like, we'd played a show in London many years ago where it was kind of an ad hoc show after the tour was cancelled, and we'd played Dissonance front to back in like a little room in London somewhere. And I remember feeling really emotional at the end of it because we played Bloodlines, which is a song that we never really expected to play live. But I just remember like getting to it. I'm like, no one's going to know this. This is the last song on a new album that came out like a month ago. Like, no one's going to know this. And we got to the end and we got to the bridge, and I just remember, the crowd was just like louder than I was. Like, I had EDM monitors in, I had my microphone in front of me, but I could just still hear them over all that. And it was really emotional. I almost broke down. Like, and someone sent me video recently of it. And I think, maybe I've over dramatized it in my mind, but I just remember just being on my knees kind of at the end of the set, just thinking, holy shit, that was amazing. And that kind of was what I had in like that kind of anchored that vision of like what the end would be like for us as a way to, you know what I mean? Like, we started it together, let's finish it together. Whenever that time comes, whenever that feels like the right call for all of us. But yeah, I guess just finding out that no, that's not going to happen. So I was like, well, let's find a course to, play some final shows. Like, I've written these songs that I feel cool about that would just be weird to do in any other context. Like, these are songs that you guys wrote. Like, I don't want to have to write new music just because I like the vocal. Like, can we tie up some loose ends, book show, like, no, you can't book shows like closer than 6 months out at that time because everyone was doing their COVID comeback. So booking venues for shows was, a 6 month thing. So let's use that 6 to 9 months to like, build, like, do a closing chapter before you open the next one. And they were just like,
for sure.
Yeah, well, nah. Like, I think the words used at one point were like, we don't want the next thing we do be that we kicked out our singer. I'm like, well, that's what you've done though, isn't it? And it kind of, I don't know, I just remember it kind of faltering. So it was complicated. Then it just, kind of devolved, got to the point where like, it just didn't feel like they were going to do anything, especially given that, the last kind of newsworthy thing about the band prior to Hurricane was, the allegations of, improper behavior. I didn't want the singer to mysteriously disappear with no explanation. So I asked like, well, how are you going to tell this to the world? And like, because like the last thing I want is some ambiguous thing that's going to make it look like, we dealt with that and now I'm quietly on the out. Like that's like, I'm not bringing that on myself when I'm not the person involved.
Yeah. And I think that was a good move on your end, just from an outsider's point of view, because that with how the world is today with like narratives and stuff like that, that could have been something that happened. And I'm not assuming, I'm just assuming here that you don't know 100% that they would have, like gone out of their way at this point to clear that up. So I think including that in your statement made sense.
Two of them independently told me explicitly that they weren't going to make any reference to that. So I was like, I don't know. I just kind of went quiet and ended up writing up what became what I posted on, in July last year. And, they weren't happy about that because, it was the truth of my experience. I was very deliberate about not saying anything that wasn't kind of provable or evidenced. And it was just my experience of it. Like, at the end of the day, I'm not saying what they did or didn't do. I'm not saying it was, like I said, I'd accepted it within that first week of that conversation. I said, well, look, there's a future that I'm not a part of and that sucks, but I'm not going to be the guy that holds you back because I'm holding on to what this is, you know? But yeah, I just felt like I needed to kind of say what, you know, find my own closure in that. And since then it's just been tied up with lawyers and, you know, it's cost them a lot of money. I've been able to, you know, lean on some things to kind of get that closer to done. And that will, you know, that's always a long process, even if you do have like, you know, agreements in place, but I'm really looking forward to that and getting finalized hopefully in the next few weeks or months, because it's been a very drawn out process and a lot of, you know, revisiting kind of, you know, you can't really kind of let things heal if there's still things kind of scratching at the skin, you know, and there's, you know, every time they release new music, it's like my inbox blows up with just unrelated stuff, but I can always kind of tell, even though I've kind of blocked it out of my mind for, you know, like I said, there's a whole head and heart approach to it, which, yeah, sorry, I'm probably talking around.
Oh, no, you're
here,
fine.
Yeah.
I just had a quick question. I didn't want to get too far away from this topic. In your statement, you know, that you did mention that you requested a place in final shows, tie up some loose ends and all that. My question to you is, do you think that, like, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this, but do you think that would have, like, you would have wanted to do that even though you know, there's some malice, there's some tension, there's, like, would that have been hard for you to do those shows, or would you have just thought, no, this is for me and this is for the fans? Like, how did that go in your head before you were turned down?
If they had said, yeah, absolutely, up front, I think it would have changed the complexion of the whole conversation afterwards. But they basically said, well, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus by recalling my interpretation of it, but I was called selfish. I was called selfish for making the suggestion, and that kind of colored it afterwards. And even though, like, there was kind of, you know, I think maybe a couple of months later, one of them suggested, like, oh, well, how would you feel about doing some, like, final shows in, like, 18 months so that we can kind of put out new music in the meantime, get things going. And I'm like, well, like, what guarantee is there in that? Like, that means keeping this, like, this, don't forget that this fucking sucks for me.
Yeah.
Like, this hurts. This is 14 years of my life in the role that I had as well. Like, you know, I think I always worked really hard to not be the, you know, the band is the extension of the singer. You know what I mean? Like, I never wanted to be that front person. I didn't want that kind of attention because I saw what it did to other people. And I'm part of this collective. Like, you know, I have a role. People relate to that role in a certain way because of the nature of music. Like, we relate to vocals because vocals are the most human element of music. They're the most accessible part of it. And so there's always going to be a certain relationship I have with our audience that is, you know, completely foreign to anyone that is doing anything other than singing or writing the lyrics and the songs. And I never took that for granted. Like, I never wanted to kind of, you know, project that onto anyone else. But as in the end, like, that kind of burned me a little bit because, you know, I guess it's been harder to kind of transition away from that. But yeah, all in all, like, it just, like I said, it just felt like that would be leaving a wound open for longer than I wanted to at the time. And it just felt like, you know what I mean? Like, that was kind of down the track after a lot of things had been said, and I'd found out other things that had been said kind of in the background about how it was characterized away from my ears. And that always fucking
sucks when, especially after it's said and done, and then you're still finding out things, again, whether or not they're true or not. When something like this happens, you hear things. You hear things that someone said, and that's never like a good place to fucking be in. So, and I that sucks, man. And I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. If I may, I might just say, like, look, it's a complex thing for me because there's my head response and my heart response, and sometimes those are totally opposite. Like, this has been a lot to process for me over the last 18 months, but I will say, you know, definitively, like, none of them have ever sought to be cruel or vindictive, or, like, I do believe that at some level they genuinely just thought this would be smooth, and, like, that I kind of wanted it to be over, and I think that they kind of leaned on that, and you know what I mean. Like, it just, like, I understand that their intentions were, I'm not going to say good or wholesome or anything like that, but I just mean, like, I think they meant well, that they meant for it to be
more painless than it was supposed
amicable.
To be. Yeah.
But it just, it kind of, you know, I guess that, you know, I think if they'd been more deliberate and upfront, it might have hurt less. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But again, like no, the way that people put things, like the way I feel about something is my responsibility. Like no one's emotions is anyone else's responsibility but their own, and I'm processing mine still through different avenues and outlets, and so. But yeah, I don't want to attack them for who they are as individuals, because they were the mates that I spent 14 years of my life with. Like, I don't want to tarnish those memories by throwing the baby out with the bathwater in this, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, but it's definitely been a difficult process, but once there is actually some semblance of closure, even if that is just an agreement and some money in the bank account that I can use to kind of build the next chapter of my life, then, that's something, as opposed to the relative nothing I have in the meantime, aside from, just I got to do that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Now, do you ever feel like maybe after the heart wound heals a little bit, I don't know, if you're doing something like a solo project down the road, or you find another band or whatever, do you think it would ever, I don't know, would you ever be able to take the stage with them again? Or is it completely done? You don't want it? Well, right now I know you don't want it, but it's hard to tell what time will do.
I mean, because you see a lot of cases where bands will be like removed from a member for like 5, 6, 7 years, and then we're in the same town. Let's do a
say you're in another band, you've got another thing going, and they want to play an old song again.
Yeah,
it's hard to tell what time will do. But
I mean, look, for me, I'm not holding that door shut. I don't think the lock's on my side of the door, though. You know what I mean? Like, there would be, like, I can't see it realistically ever happening, because I just think there's too much baggage that would have to be worked through because of the way things kind of devolved and happened. And I mean, I'm seeing them as a collective unit because, there are individuals that I would make time for. There are individuals I absolutely wouldn't, because of those things. And I'm kind of surprised in some ways of which ones are which in retrospect. But, I think that's, I mean, like I said, look, I don't want to kind of throw water on someone else's spark of hope that it might happen. And look, never say never. And I think that's the nature of the time does heal, time does change. But I think there's plenty of other things that would need to happen in the meantime for me to feel like that wouldn't just be, like, I mean, hell, we toured with a band who got back together with their original lineup and then reminded themselves why they broke up in the first place. Like, we've been there and I've seen that happen, and I don't ever want to do that.
For sure.
To myself or to my bandmates or even people that care about the band. So, yeah.
And obviously, if there's anything else you wanted to say about the departure, feel free. But I did have, I wanted to eventually move on to some happier things. I just wanted you to know I wasn't shutting you down. So if there's anything else important you wanted to add to all this.
I don't think so. I mean, I have my ways. Like, I know that the closure I'll get is a closure I make for myself. And that's what I'm still actively working on through various channels. And it's been really nice to kind of get back to music as a process thing rather than a product thing.
Oh, yeah.
So I've, just put up some covers of, old Hands tracks, but also,
I saw the Ocean Dust
song with a friend, and
I saw the Ocean Dust one you posted today, and I was like, because I actually have that one written down in here to ask you about that song, because that was like my favorite song for like fucking forever, dude. It was like 5 years. So just getting into like, I'm a massive fan of the albums that you've created, and I just wanted to dive into some older songs. The first one I want to jump into, because it's the first song I ever heard by you, was Lion Skin. And I remember, I think it was like a fucking Facebook ad, or it might have even been before Facebook ads, but I saw it and I was like, dude, I got to check this band out. And that's where it started for me. So do you have anything specific to say about that song, its meaning, how it came about, anything? I'm just curious.
It's funny. I've spent a bit of time with Lion Skin, kind of after the fact, especially since, because like it opened up so many doors, and like having, prominent vocalists who I won't name for other reasons, but like that really kind of kickstarted a lot of things for us. And I'm really grateful for those songs. And I mean, that one was always a cool one for me, because, we did the the acoustic version in my lounge room where I was living at the time. Like, you know, we self-produced that. I recorded that in that room with whatever mics we could gather, and it, you know, certainly isn't a hi-fi production by any stakes. But you know, we were lucky that one of the guys' brother was a filmmaker and kind of came and recorded that for us, and that kind of, you know, laid the foundations we would build the rest of our career from. So yeah, very cool song, and always going to be proud of it, regardless of any attachment to things we don't need to talk about. Yeah.
As a fan, I just got to say that it was a perfect song to be introduced to a project with. Cause so that song came out, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't it like 2012, 2011, something like that?
It came out in, see, that's
sometime
that's
around then.
So I think it came out, yeah, we recorded it. Okay, so we recorded Ground Dweller in two halves, in 2010 and 2011. I'm pretty sure we released Lion Skin in the latter part of 2010.
Okay.
Maybe not. Maybe it was 2011, but we released it as a single through MySpace. Like, you know, that's, the album came out in 2012, but we'd kind of started recording like 2 years prior at that point, because we went over to record an EP in Florida. And then all the labels were like, this is amazing. Like, this is awesome. We really would love to work with this, but we're not interested in an EP. We need an album. Mm-hmm. Can you come back and finish it? And we're like, I guess we can. So
either way, I mean,
we should listen to labels far too much, but
yeah, for sure. Either way, I was like 13 years old when I heard that song. That's the point I was getting to. And man, I was so influenced by that track. And the next track I want to talk about, Watchmaker, which features a vocalist we can talk about, Matty Mullins from Memphis Mayfire. And I'm just curious, what was it like to work with him, and what was it like to create that song, and anything else you want to say about Ground Dweller too while you're at it?
Yeah, I mean, there was a bit of a staggered thing with Matty. So we'd met Matty at the back of the Social, I think it was, in Orlando. We kind of went to a show while we were in the studio and kind of met the Memphis dudes, and I think they were playing with like Sleeping with Sirens and like maybe Broadway or something. Can't remember who else on that show, but anyway, we met them, hung out, and it was cool. But I think we kind of reached out after the fact, or we kind of chatted about like, hey, did you want to feature on the record? And it kind of happened after the fact, but so it kind of, I don't really have a specific memory of like working with him directly, but yeah, I mean, you know, it's cool. You know, I guess I never, like, we did a few tours with them and stuff, and like definitely still mates with a couple of the guys in there, like probably Jake more than anyone, because he actually engineered the drums on Ground Dweller. It's a fun fact if people didn't realize that, but he was working at a Chango at the time, and I think that's how Jake ended up in Memphis Mayfire. I don't think I can't remember exactly how that lined up, because he used to be in Broadway, and I don't know. There's all a bit of a mush of people that were connected to other people at the time.
Well, and I'm just thinking, like, when featuring, you know, Matty on a song, and you talk about working with Jake and all that, around that time, Memphis was like the best-selling Rise Records band at the time, I believe, or shortly after that. Yeah. And I'm just wondering, as a newer band with your first album, like, how cool is that to feature a band like that and to work with a band like that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I remember for the other feature, like, you know, I remember getting a text message while I was on my lunch break, and I had to go in and tell my manager, hey, can I go home for like an hour? Because I needed to go over I don't even know what we were using, Skype call, I think it was back then. Like, I need to go on a Skype call, because someone that's a big deal is recording on my record, is recording on my song. I need to go home and be part of this.
It's got to be validating, right? To have someone interested in being on one of your songs like that.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I think the value of features has absolutely like tanked in more recent years, unless it's a collaboration between, like, you know, different audiences. But you know what I mean? Like, it's not the case of like the new band gets the vocalist of a senior band, and then suddenly that starts an upward trajectory the way that it did for us. Like, I think nowadays it's like, oh, cool, this person I like and this person I've heard of is singing together, rather than like this person I like. I mean, I think bands kind of killed that for themselves by doing too many features for just like, you know, pay for like, you know, paid features. So, and I did a couple of those early on, and I mean, I ended up kind of forming bonds with different like, I don't regret any that I've done, but some of them were just kind of like, oh, this band's asked you, yeah, sure, why not? Like, but there was no like personal connection there.
Well, let's be real for a second too. I mean, back in 2010 to 2014, and I'm going to say someone's name because my audience knows I absolutely love Sleeping with Sirens and Kellen Quinn, right? But back then, a Kellen Quinn feature could take your band from nothing to playing the similar sized venues, right? It made that big of a deal. And nowadays that's not the case anymore. And I think that that's very interesting to look at. And I think it has something to do with what you said. And again, no shade to Kellen. I love Kellen to death. But I just think that, like you said, features don't carry as much weight as they used to. They're more of just a cool thing if you're a fan of both projects, like you said. But
it's an exclamation point. I feel like they're an exclamation point.
Yeah.
But that, punctuation only matters if someone's listening, Yeah,
for sure.
I would almost kind of compare that to, when we interviewed Ben from Census, like how big Dayseeker is.
Yes.
And they've got, a feature from Rory on there, but it doesn't have nearly as many plays.
No, it doesn't. And that's like, and we were talking to him about it and he was like, yeah, that song should have taken off.
Yeah.
But back in like the MySpace days, that would have been huge.
Yes.
But it's just not how it is anymore. But I thought that was cool being a 12, 13-year-old. And I was like, oh my gosh, I listen to Memphis Mayfire. I listen to these artists and they're, doing songs with this artist. That means I got to listen to this artist now.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. That was pre-algorithms. Like that was our algorithm, was MySpace top 8s. Like that's how we found music. So,
that's crazy.
Things.
Yeah. The MySpace era is such a fever dream because I was so young when it was happening, but
yeah.
So I feel like when you
I think we've all blocked it successfully from our minds a little bit as well.
Yes. I think that you guys, really transitioned from, your first record into your second record, which was on Imagine. And that's, where I really was like, okay, this is the band. This is the only thing that matters right now. And I wrote down art rock. I've always considered Unimagine like a very art rocky album. And I don't know if that makes any sense to anyone but myself. But no, I get it. I remember when I first heard Introduce Species, and it just blew my mind. And I just wanted to be a little bit of a fan right now and ask you to talk a little bit about that song. And then I want to also talk about Ocean Dust, those two songs specifically, because you brought Ocean Dust back up for me today. So.
Yeah. All right. It's funny. I'm just thinking like Introduce Species, I don't have like critical memories connected to it. Like there are certainly, I don't remember where it came from, which, I hope that's not disappointing to hear, but like, I do remember like shooting the video clip for it. I think it was the first time I'd worn makeup in a video clip, but it was because of the lighting setup and they needed it. I don't know. It was really uncomfortable. I remember sweating heaps and it was the weirdest feeling. But anyway.
Tell me about this song. I was like sweating.
House in LA.
I remember it being real hot.
well, basically, yeah. And I remember like our whole team, like there's like cables flying everywhere. And I remember we're basically playing jump rope with microphone cables, like behind us, if you look in the clip, it's there, like they're kind of waving around it. It's just microphone cables in the foreground, just creating a sense of visual noise. But
that's pretty cool though.
I remember that. I remember that strongly. Yeah. But I
mean, you can just talk about Unimagine in general too. I mean, like I will not be disappointed with anything regarding this album.
Yeah. Oh, look, there's whole other episodes of stuff I could kind of talk about from memories and stuff, but like, and a lot of it doesn't come to mind unless I really specifically knock on a particular door, but like maybe Ocean Dust, like, cause the lyrics for Ocean Dust. So I think we wrote that one in the studio. A lot of the other songs we had kind of mostly together when we got to the studio. Cause basically once we finished writing, Ground Dweller, it took 12 months to kind of get signed and get it out and get it into the world. But like we had 12 months of writing plus probably another 6 months into 20. That's why, I mean, it came out like just like less than 18 months after Ground Dweller because we'd already basically written most of the songs. But Ocean Dust, James Wisner, our producer, had like this cool old piano in his house that we were recording in. And Jamal just had this kind of piano part that he'd been working on, and we knew that we needed something kind of like a down tempo sort of like palette cleanser in the album. And so, yeah, he just started kind of recorded that. It's like, it's off the click. It's, you know, it's a kind of a very feel driven song. Like I said, there was either no metronome or Jamal didn't keep to it very well, but it kind of gives that kind of push and pull sort of feel to it, which, you know, thematically is actually really cool, that like the tempo ups and downs with, you know, the in and out of waves, for example. Like, I love that parallel. But yeah, I kind of wrote it, and the inspiration was like a poem I wrote on a high school English writing camp, where like my school, like I had a tiny little school of like, I think our grade was like 30 people. Was just like kind of the first year group that went through that age at our school. And my favorite English teacher, who kind of, you know, inspired me to write, period.
Sure.
Like, she was phenomenal. But took our class down to just a writing camp down by the beach in like a little small town called Tathra, in New South Wales, South Coast. And I remember we just went out to the beach for a sunrise, and no one talked to each other. This is not about talking. This is about walking down together in silence, and we sit on the beach and we're going to write. And I remember just playing with sand and just kind of, I don't know, like, I'm just lifting up a handful of dry sand and just let it kind of fall through my fingers. And that kind of, I wrote a poem about it, about just like how it's crazy that, you know, this sand has been thrown by, you know, it's shells, it's, you know, grit, it's ocean, things in the ocean just rubbing over each other for, you know, hundreds, thousands of years, millennia, all just crushing over itself until it becomes what it becomes, which is this fluid thing of, you know, kind of time and turmoil. And I wrote this poem about that. I can't even remember the words, but I remember a friend that came along. He was actually an art student, but he was the only art student in the grade. And he came along on the camp because why not? And he was actually sketching out people's stuff. And I still have that book somewhere around here. I think where he's just showed like kind of quickly sketched my hand with sand falling through it. And that was just kind of, we had this like little publication of poems that we just published within the school, just, you know, gave copies to our parents or whatever. But yeah, that became what the lyrics were for Ocean Dust. So, you know, just that.
Beautiful.
Like,
I couldn't have had a better answer in mind when I asked you about that song. That's wonderful. So I'm the Unimagined guy. That's my album. He is the Dissonance guy. So we're going to transition a little bit into Dissonance now.
All right.
Yeah. So Dissonance obviously went a little heavier than what was there before. So do you think people were expecting it at all? Or maybe it came out of left field? I don't know.
Because y'all were in a corner. Yeah, you were in a corner with heavier bands. And I think it was very cool, actually, that you weren't doing the heavy thing on some of your albums. But anyway, yeah.
It's funny in retrospect, because I think there were people that, like, Dissonance probably gets the most praise of any of our records broadly, I think. But at the time, you know, we'd had year, you know, we were just constantly touring with heavy bands because that was the scene that we were in, the record label we were on. Like, it was just the expectation of this, you know, emo world that you were supposed to be heavy, and like Unimagined was kind of like a bit of a counter to that.
Yeah, like you had the guitars, you had the chuggy guitars in some songs, but it was always the clean, very mellow, like vocals, which again is why that's my favorite album.
Yeah, well, that was the time when everyone like had like a singer and a screamer, and it just felt like both had to justify being there. So just, you know, it was kind of a weird sort of time. And then no knock to bands that were doing that, but I think the expectations were people were pushing us to do that, and we're like, no, we're just doing our thing.
So
like,
did it feel,
you know, let us do what we're doing? Did
it feel more forced? And also, is it something you enjoyed doing? The more heavier screaming? No, I think so. Like,
there's a bit of both. So, I mean, I was like, I never had anything against screaming. Like, I first tried out for this particular group by kind of trying as the screamer when they had a singer, and then they ended up booting him. For me, full circle. But he, you know, anyway, that's that we're done with that conversation. But no, like they, yeah. So like I never was against screaming. Like I grew up in Lincoln Park. Like I love Chester's voice, and I think that, you know, that duality of Linkin Park like always influenced me. So I think, and I always listened to heavier music than we were making. Like I was kind of the one at the heavy end of the spectrum, while the other guys were listening to kind of less. Like,
I never would have expected that, if I'm being completely honest. Of the world that
we're in.
You know, in my head, I was like, I bet the singer is the one that likes the lighter stuff. But that's just, I don't know why I thought that.
No, man. I mean, you know, I grew up on like, you know, all the Solid State stuff. So like, you know, Norma Jean, Zayo, Under Oath, that world, that was my world. And so like, you know, even through bands like, you know, Carpathians, like more punk leaning stuff, like the later stuff in their career. That's like an Australian band that I really loved at the time. And it's funny, I Am specifically actually, because like I Am was kind of the cornerstone for that record. We wrote that song with Eric Ron in LA. Just working in his studio, we recorded it, and then kind of, I think we did that before we did the rest of the record, but that kind of, there was also the side, we were talking about Warped Tour before, like Warped Tour, we kind of knew that was kind of winding up, and no one really knew what was going to happen to this emo scene. Like, and so I think the opportunities were in kind of, you know, rock radio, right, which, you know, I think, you know, maybe we're a bit too early for that being kind of ubiquitous with the bands that are up there now, like, you know, your Bad Omens and Bring Me In, stuff like that. Like, you know, those bands getting into that world, that door was, you know, it certainly wasn't open to bands from our world, but it was certainly cracked. Yeah. And I think we thought, well, that makes sense. You know, it kind of bucks expectations. That was something we always liked to do, was to challenge expectations, not throw up a middle finger about it, but just like, you know, so the screaming in I Am, like we built up to it, like there was nothing in it until it got to that point. So it just felt like a Heavy Hands song until it was just like, you know, I am dissonant, but like it just kind of like, I wanted people to go, holy shit.
That's
like,
exactly what happened though. You know, when y'all released I Am, and then even Colorblind, which I know you want to get into. I think when those singles, because they were both singles, correct? Both I Am and...
yes.
Yeah. I remember hearing those and I'd be like, holy shit. He's screaming, or he's like yell screaming in this one, and he's full on screaming in this one. It was a big deal. And people were talking about it on Facebook and Twitter. I remember.
Yeah. And it worked for that reason. Like, you know, I kind of think we'd spent so many years being the band that didn't scream when everyone else kind of was, and it seemed like everyone wanted us to, but we're like, you know, and then we finally did it at a point where it just made sense for us. And I mean, you know, it's funny you mention I Am specifically, actually, because the breakdown in that was actually kind of very much inspired by, I'm trying to remember there was a band called, I'm blanking. It's on my iPod Classic. It's like a really obscure, there was this like tiny little like hardcore band out of Sydney that just wrote this hardcore, like, it was like The Artist, The Thief, or Scarlett O'Hara were the two songs that I can't remember which one it was from, but it just had this like filthy like like it just had this like stank face vibe to it, and I wanted like, so the breakdown in that, like I kind of worked with Eric on, because we'd built up to this point. We knew we wanted a breakdown, but we didn't know what it wanted to be, and I was like, we've got to lean on this, man, because it's like bullshit heavy, cool, like stank face, like open tune, like, you know, open notes. But it was a cool band that I like, just a song that I really enjoyed myself, and I was able to kind of bring that in for I Am, and that was always a cool little like, I don't know, clutch moment for me.
You know, for your fans that did like screaming and they just like clean it, there wasn't so much of it on the album to where it made it so those people didn't like it. I still feel like you kept the Hands Like Houses formula and then just added that in, sprinkle a little bit on a song here and there, and that's why it worked.
Exactly. You know, it's indicative of a single emotion. I think that you know, when you lean on one emotion too heavily, it becomes, you know, reductive. It becomes like, I don't know, like a linchpin of something that it's not meant to be. Like it's one emotion in it's one crayon in the box, so to speak. So, use it when it's right. But yeah.
And as far as like the Dissonance album, Colorblind, I feel like was it's the one that took off the hardest. Is that something you guys expected?
Yeah, because you said you heard it on Octane, didn't you?
I heard it. It's one of the songs when you brought it up again, and I was like, yes, I've definitely heard this song a lot somewhere. Yeah. I feel like it has been played a lot more.
You could probably confirm for us if you'd probably know if it was on Octane or not, but I feel like I heard it on Octane.
Yeah, it definitely was.
Okay, great. I'm glad I was right about that.
That's what I meant. Like the door was like cracked into that world. Like Octane was kind of what led the way, because all the terrestrial rock radio wouldn't have touched anything from our world with a 10-foot pole.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. We've got some stations here.
Yes.
There's a couple stations like during the not really during their peak hours, but like throughout the day, they'll play things that are like modern and heavy.
Yeah.
And it kind of, tickles our fancy a little bit, but I hardly ever listen to the radio for that reason.
Yeah.
But would you say that's only really kind of been in the last 5 or so years?
Oh, yeah.
I think
for sure.
10 years ago, like,
yeah, I think
that Octane was kind of the forward thinking kind of rock radio, challenging it, not just the technology, but just like the actual like culture around rock music. And I think that door was starting to open. So Octane was a big, kind of, I guess, a win for us. Like, you asked kind of, did we expect it to do what it did? Like, no, but it's certainly what we hoped for.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Like, we hoped it would do what it did, and it did. So, but I wouldn't say we expected it to, because I don't think we ever really expected much as an Australian band in America making, slightly shouty, slightly pretty rock music.
I mean, and even at the beginning of Octane, it was more like very specific bands. It was Of Mice and Men, Memphis Mayfire. It was Bring Me the Horizon, but I feel like it's definitely getting bigger, and this type of music is definitely getting like to a point where it's hitting kind of mainstream. Like, I think my wife and I were debating the other day, is Bring Me the Horizon mainstream? It's like, well, yeah, kind of. Like, there are people that don't listen to this type of music that know the name Bring Me the Horizon. So yes, I'd say it's going into that territory a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like if you can go into like any city and you'll see some of their merch, that's pretty much mainstream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's reasonable.
All right. So we have some fan questions that we put it on TikTok that we were going to be interviewing you today. And we have a few. Jake, did you want to read the first one?
What's your fave city to play in America? This is a question by Grace. And I know you said a little bit ago that it's all kind of a blur, but it's hard to pick a favorite.
The cheeky, cynical Australian in me is just like, well, you didn't specify which part of America, so I'm just going to say Toronto, Canada.
Perfect.
But that's just me being. That's just me being spicy.
Yeah,
no,
Brazil.
Genuinely, I didn't quite make it to South America or Central even, which a bit of a regret, but that's okay. Favorite city? I think.
If he says Richmond, this podcast is over. We're going to end on that. No, I'm just kidding.
Complete achievement unlocked. Sorry. New York City was always really special.
Fair enough.
Just because I don't know. It's New York. Like, New York's New York. Yeah. It's unlike anything else. I feel like Denver was always really good to us, and no, that's not just nothing to do with the chemicals available on site, but no, I just mean like it was just always like, even before the legalization of stuff, it was always just a cool place to play. Like that was always a good spot. LA was weird, like it was always fun, and Atlanta was sick before it wasn't. Like I always enjoyed Atlanta until it sucked.
You're not the first artist I've heard say that Atlanta used to be a good place to play in, but isn't as great anymore. That's so funny that I've heard that multiple times now.
That is definitely a thing. It's a conversation I've had with people from within and without. Actually, I'm going to strike all that and say Dallas. Okay,
fair enough.
It's like, I think Dallas has consistently been like awesome. Houston to a lesser degree, that sort of area has always been good. But yeah, I'd say Dallas. But New York, always special. Denver's always sick. Lots of cool ones in lots of other places, and it kind of all blurs a bit.
And y'all didn't hear him because he cut out, but he did say honorable mention is Richmond, Virginia. Okay, moving on to the next question.
Hey, I mean, the Canal Club is definitely planted in my memory. Those columns, I remember swinging around those columns.
Amazing.
Houston area is where most of my wife's family's from, so
there you go.
Spent time there.
It's also I think the hit and run capital of the world, which I learnt when one of the other guys got hit by a car, and I woke up in the back of the van to like a ambulance right outside my window.
Oh my gosh.
It had to have been on one of those highways. Those highways are ridiculous down there.
Nope. Just outside the venue.
Just
but he
outside
tried,
the venue?
To be fair, he was very drunk and tried to like do like a Bond style like bonnet slide over a moving car, and the car just accelerated.
Welcome to America. Our next question, Jake.
Right, we got another one. This one's from Alex, and it's kind of a broad thing, and I know it might be hard for you. He asked, what's your favorite song to play?
I guess that means play live.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Play live. I guess that would be probably whichever one you have the most heart in.
Yeah, no, give me a second. Which is funny that you said it's fun. We'll come back to why that's funny in a second. I just want to just do a quick mental skim to validate my answer. Okay, it's really funny that you said that. So half-hearted.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right.
Just the pun there of like it's the one with the most heart in it. It's actually only about half. But
did you do that on purpose, Jake?
And the reason being, there's a few parts in that song. So one of my favorite like feel moments of any record is like off the back of the first chorus. I want to know how you feel. Like just that, this the cadence of that melody. I don't think that's the right lyric. It's been a while since I've been through that song, but like off the back of that, just that song has such push and pull. Like such a beautiful contrast. It's fun to sing. And when we got to do it live was kind of at a peak moment for us in our Australian tours. And there was we had these confetti cannons. Like it's just one of those songs where like there's this really cool like climax moment where you just pump the confetti cannons. And I just remember just like, yeah, that was always just such a rad, like, you know, the closer before the encore type song. And that was always a favorite for me.
Great choice.
And our last question here is from...
Oh, this is the one I was talking about earlier when I said that it wasn't very specific.
No, it's not specific at all.
Right.
Well, this is from Call Sign Sora. I guess he's trying to ask what literally says what was starting out like. So I guess he's trying to say, what is it like to be a small band and like, trying to make your way?
Like at the very beginning. That's how I want that question to be answered.
Is it?
It's funny. It's the total opposite to how I feel now, but like bright-eyed.
Okay.
As in, I think you just feel like anything's possible. I mean, it's also an age thing. Like, you know, the age when you tend to start a band is usually you're a bit more optimistic about the world and your place in it. I think, you know, you're confident in your own abilities and you're like, I can do something incredible. And then, you know,
you haven't been ruined by the world
15
yet.
years later. Exactly. No, old and jaded. But no, it's, yeah, like, there's a lot of stuff you take for granted when you start out. But at the same time, like, you know, I know that my experience was not typical. Like, you know, most bands that start and finish, like, you know, they disintegrate, they fall apart, they just they exist and then they don't.
Well, I was going to say, speaking of like starting out being young and like bright-eyed about it,
yep.
I'm not a musician. I'm not super familiar with that, but I would kind of compare that to like what I do for a job now. Is the fact that if you start doing something you love, there is a path that it could take you into being a job.
Yeah.
So if you're making money from it, and that sometimes takes...
I was about to say, can I get philosophical here? Because, yeah, like...
Absolutely.
I hate the saying that, like... There are two sayings, like common sayings that I hate. One is fake it till you make it, because that is straight up bullshit. Number two is that the idea that, like, you know, basically, like, you know, it's something about, like, what, you know, if you find do something you love and you won't work a day in your life, something like that. Like, that's the cliche of it.
Yeah. I find
that's the thing. Like, looking back on it, like, I think what killed music for me in a lot of ways, like, you know, I don't want to say that in a way it kind of like invalidates anything we've talked about for a while, but like one thing that kind of burned me over time was just the idea that like I have to do this. not I want to do this. So I think the freedom of kind of, post-band me has been like, take time, embrace the process, like learn things along the way. And I don't have to put something out to get in the enjoyment and satisfaction out of it. Like my measure of success has changed. So yeah, like, it's by not needing to build a life on top of music, I enjoy music a lot more. But as a kid, like if I didn't have that sense of optimism in the first place, we probably wouldn't have aimed high and flew to the fucking US of A to record an album. As a bunch of like, there are so many reasons why that happened, but optimism was definitely one of them. Naivety, perhaps.
And the way I was going to compare that with my job, I'm a mechanic, I'm an auto technician. Cars, I've always loved cars since I was like a little kid. So that's what everybody told me. Well, why don't you just go do that for a living? So I did. And now it's way more of a job and I don't enjoy it as much. Now I just drive a normal, regular car because it's easier.
I think there's a happy balance, but yeah, I think dependence, you know what I mean? Like depending on the thing you love to let you do the things you need to do, especially, if cost of living was not a concern, if like you didn't have to pay your way in the world, then yeah, great. Like do what you love. But like as soon as food on the table is dependent on being able to do what you love to a quality enough that people care enough about it to pay you money in some capacity, like that's, that's a lot of pressure.
And that's we talked about it last week with the podcast. We were just kind of like, that's why that if this thing never makes any money, that's fine because we do this for fun. And the second, we start depending on it, there's a chance it's not as fun anymore. So.
Yeah.
I know we have taken up a lot of your time, Trenton. I wanted you to get to lunch. I wanted to just lastly ask you, do you have is there a music future that you're looking at right now for yourself? Is there anything you can talk about or want to talk about with any
not
music?
At the moment. I think like, look, I'm working on music. Like that's the bottom line of it, but I don't want to say that in a way. Like I don't want to generate hype. I don't want to gaslight people into like, the next thing's going to be like, I don't want to be the guy that tries to outdo the band that he became as somebody in inverted commas through. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to be trying to one up and prove that me not being a part of it was the right decision. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to be that guy. So for me, it's about healing. It's about process. It's about just creating a hobby for myself with something with all of the things I've learned. Like if I were to start over, what would I do? But even still, like starting a band, like it means taking someone else's kind of dreams and aspirations and kind of wearing them on your back. Like, whether you're starting out or you've done what I've been able to do, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of that balance.
But that makes sense.
I think, I've got a healthy relationship with music now, and that's been really kind of pleasant to engage with. Yeah, that's a tangent. My bad.
If you were to come across a band that is already fully formed, but they just need a singer, I mean, I know it would be hard to align like your musical trajectories and what you expect and all this, but
if someone came to you and was like, "Hey, Trenton, you're the missing piece,"
I don't think I'd rule it out comprehensively, but at the same time as well, like my life is different now. I don't want to change that just for, some dream, especially if it's a fully formed band. There's going to be like expectations and kind of politics to, for better or for worse to kind of engage with. So I think, I would certainly think about it, but it would have to be someone I had a connection with, like a meaningful connection with, or, if Linkin Park came knocking, I'd say, you know what? I think I can put my principles aside for this one. But obviously that's said with the utmost respect for Chester and the role he played in my life as well. So, but you know what I mean? Like, I don't think I would. For me, music is about like kind of projects, and I've had ideas about things that would be cool to do. Whether I do them, I don't know. I'm still in a kind of a mental space of like tying up loose ends and kind of, celebrating what I got to do and just rediscover my process, what I'm capable of, what I'm not, and, kind of figuring out like, I couldn't be a Beartooth style band where I am the creative engine and everyone else is just the touring apparatus. Like, Caleb Shomo is Beartooth.
props to Caleb though, for all that. That is crazy.
Absolutely. It's like, I have the utmost respect for him, like professionally, regardless of any, friendship that we have. But like, dude can write a song. and so like, I'm not going to be that guy that can do everything, like play the drums, I can do a lot of it, but certainly not to that sort of standard. So, the people that I would need to work with would need to be kind of keyed into those weaknesses so yeah, like I'm not rushing at it. Like, it takes a commitment of time and energy and just passion for life that I have invested elsewhere. So yeah.
But if just to calm some minds, people that are fans of yours, you'd say you're not done with music.
No, absolutely not.
Good to hear.
But yeah, like I said, the reasons for it for now is they're my own reasons. And I, if it doesn't get heard, that'd be disappointing, but that's not the point of it. So that's why I don't want to kind of create expectations or build hype with things that may come sooner or later. Like, I have just sent 2 songs off to mastering, but I won't really comment further on like what. There's other aspects that may kind of delay that as well. So yeah, I don't want to.
Well, whenever that time comes, whether it's a week from now or 2 years from now, I hope you know that you always have our support, and we'll definitely talk about your music on the show when we do our normal single reviews and album reviews and all that.
Huge.
And absolutely. Thank you so much, dude. I know this part of this conversation was probably a difficult one to have, and I appreciate you having it with us. And we're looking forward to anything you have to create in the future. Did you have anything you wanted to say to your fans for the last bit here?
I mean, just if you listen to this, thanks for sticking around. Thanks for, giving a shit when I'm sporadic as hell. The support I've had for just a couple of, even just covers I've put up, just the sense of connection that people have kind of expressed through that is one of the most humbling and powerful things. And, it's kind of really helps with the healing. So, I'm so grateful that people have just continued to pay attention to whatever it is that I'm doing, whether that's, weekend dad bike rides or, singing songs. It means a lot. So thank you.
Well, again, I can't say enough good things about you and our experiences with you and setting this up and just the music in general. So thank you so much. And again, we're looking forward to anything you have to create.
Thank you both for your time and tangents.